Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cancer Book Club. We have a wonderful book and guest this month. The book is WarriorPose. It's by Bhava Ram. And Emmett Miller wrote a wonderful summation of the book. He writes, WarriorPose is Indiana Jones merged with Buddha, a miraculous affirmation of the power of self-healing, a war story, a love story, and a spiritual journey of epic proportion. It is your story, my story, the human story. And that's why it's one of my favorite books. Bhava, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Patricia, and with everyone else that's along for this interview and along for the ride of surviving cancer.
You know, one of the things that I saw in the book that I found really interesting is you have a whole series of mantras. And the mantra for the first part of the book is, I'm going to work longer and harder than anyone else. That served you well as a war correspondent. And what was it like being a war correspondent?
Well, it was really fascinating. I was with NBC Network News after having worked at a number of network affiliate stations across the country earlier in my career. And I ultimately wanted to be a foreign correspondent and finally had that opportunity right when the Gulf War broke out. So that was my first foreign war. I'd actually been in Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation in 1986 as well, but this was full-blown front-to-front war in the Gulf War, as everyone recalls. And something happens in war that I think speaks a lot to the PTSD that many have afterwards. And that's that even though it's dangerous, you're fully in the present moment. It's crystallizing. It's like a powerful, dangerous, explosive meditation of pure presence. So it gives you such a sense of purpose, especially as a journalist when you're covering it. It gives you such a sense of awareness. You don't have time to get distracted or have flights of fancy because that could cost you your life. So I enjoyed it. And being that type A you mentioned about I'm going to work longer and harder than anyone else, I enjoyed that part of it too.
You know, I was looking at some Joseph Campbell quotes this morning, and of course, this came to mind, and I found one that I just loved. I don't think people are looking for the meaning of life as much as the experience of being alive. Mm-hmm. And that so goes to that present moment sense of a war zone.
That's why I mentioned PTSD. I've come to believe after having been in a few conflicts around the world, and after having realized finally that I've had PTSD myself, that oftentimes it's not from witnessing horrors, the loss of your best friend, bombs exploding, carnage in the field. It's that when you leave, in my case, the journalistic profession, but if you leave the military due to an injury or your time is up, your sense of identity is gone. You're no longer part of the tribe. You're no longer living those peak moments where you have that crystal clarity in your life. And that starts a cycle of depression and panic and anxiety and anger, and it can begin to explode when least expected, which is what we call traumatic stress.
That loss of identity is a theme that comes up again and again. And Robin, you write about that in your book as well.
I'm interested in this discussion a lot on another level because I'm a psychologist, a clinical psychologist in my day job, and I'm not a crazy cancer patient advocate, person on the hostess for Cancer Book Club. That's what I do, and so that's what I was doing today. That's what I came back from this afternoon, is treating people for PTSD. First responders and others and combat veterans and so on is part of what I do as my day-to-day. So I was very, very interested in all of that aspect of the book and the healing from it that you experienced.
What do you think was the critical turning point in your ability to begin to let go of such a strong identification with war journalism? Was it forced upon you, or did you willingly?
No, it took years and years. It was journalism itself. It was that identity of being a network news reporter for NBC Broadcast News. What happened to me is that I lost my career to a broken back. It was not a cancer diagnosis. And this happened in 1993, a broken back and a failed surgery. So suddenly I went from being this man who could cross deserts and climb mountains and could work longer and harder than anybody else, to someone lying in bed in a big back brace, my sternum down to my hips with a metal band running down my left leg attached by a strap around just above my left knee, pickled on Vicodin and Valium and Prozac. And I felt completely dehumanized, emasculated as a male, that I no longer could work for a living, tremendous economic fear about the future, feeling of complete worthlessness. I had lost this identity, my tribe of fellow journalists, and I became really despondent and deeply, deeply depressed. And I really became a master of self-pity and pretty good with anger and fear. And I didn't even realize how depressed I was, or when I would have anger outbursts. I didn't even see them. And I was that way until 1997, when my son was born. And that finally started to crack me open a little bit. And shortly after his birth in early 1998, I got sick and then sicker, and no one could determine what it was. And suddenly a lump came up on the side of my neck, my lymph node, and was very painful. And ultimately that was discovered to be stage 4 cancer, that we eventually traced back to exposure to depleted uranium in the Persian Gulf War by the American forces to pierce Iraqi tanks. And my doctor said, you're going to be very fortunate if you even live for 2 years, and here's some morphine to go along with this arsenal of pharmaceutical medications I had, not to mention one too many beers every night. And I became deeper depressed. So this was many, many years, 7 years or so, that I was feeling sorry for myself and dealing with the state of PTSD. And it wasn't until the year 2000, just as the year started, that my little boy had turned 2. He was born in mid-December. And he came to me, and we were very, very close. I mean, he spent his life on my body brace on my chest. And he came to me, and he suddenly realized in a way a 2-year-old can that something was really wrong with Daddy. And he sort of trembled when he gazed at me with his beautiful eyes, and he was on the brink of tears. And he said 3 words that finally took me to that place of acceptance. It was, "Get up, Daddy." And it hit me in a place that I didn't even know that I had inside of me. It cracked me wide open. And I thought, how can I get up for this child? I have a broken back, a failed surgery. I'm dying of cancer. Woe is me. And I finally thought, after many agonizing evenings over the next week, that the way I could get up was to check into a rehab hospital and get off of alcohol and pharmaceutical medications and die with dignity. That was the only way I could get up and be a daddy to that boy, was for him to somehow know or be told by my family later in his life that your father died with dignity. And that led to this journey of ultimately discovering mind-body medicine. The very first mind-body autogenic tape I heard was from Dr. Emmett Miller, who the quote that Patricia so kindly read on the book WarriorPose, his feelings about it. That's when all the lights went on. And that's when I realized healing comes through letting go. It comes through acceptance. It comes through changing mental agreements and physical agreements as well, lifestyle and dietary agreements that change our neurology, our body's inner chemistry, and maximize our capacity to heal. And that's what I began doing over the next 2 years, not knowing again whether I would live or I would die, was maximizing the capacity of this organism to heal. And miraculously, I feel I was fortunate enough that I have healed.
Well, leading on and kind of dovetailing onto that, I also have parented a young child. Ours was 4 at the time that I went through heart failure. And one of the questions that I had for you, parent to parent, was, as your son has aged, how have you navigated the waters of his obviously being a motivator to your healing and your desire to heal, along with navigating and preventing perhaps the transfer of a sense of responsibility onto him for your recovery and healing?
I don't think with my son, whose name is Morgan, that it was ever a problem. God can work in strange ways. And while I sort of cursed any idea of higher power when I had a broken back and a lost career and stage 4 cancer, I was blessed, maybe it was to make up for all of those lessons, by this son who's just been an amazingly evolved soul ever since he was born.
How old is he now?
He's now 19.
19.
He never got to follow in my footsteps. He's always heard his own song and pursued his own dreams. And I never asked him to follow the yoga and Ayurvedic medicine and mind-body meditation techniques that I had embraced in my life and are still an integral part of what I do, or to think about being a journalist like Daddy. But by sheer happenstance in high school, he got into a broadcast program and he came alive. He loved editing and shooting film, and he became the anchor man of his high school's TV news. And so now he's off at Walter Cronkite School of Broadcast Journalism.
Oh my goodness.
I
That's
spoke
great.
to him just before this interview, and everybody, I want you to know that my son Morgan Willis made the dean's list in his
Yay!
I'm so proud of him. He's always been easy, and somehow higher power knew that I needed easy. My state of mind. So it's not been a problem.
That's great.
You know, one of the things, it's part of the book, but it's a part of your life. Can we talk a little bit about the science of yoga? Because people think of yoga as just the asanas, the movement, but there's so much more. And I find it fascinating, and I know you're an expert in it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but yoga, I like to say, is a complete mind-body spiritual science of how to be a human being. It dates back to perhaps the world's oldest text called the Vedas, written some 6,000 years ago when writing came to pass. But before that, there were thousands of years more in which this wisdom was passed down from teacher to student. They called it from guru to disciple through mantra, through repetition. And these verses of the Veda were thousands of verses. And part of their yoga practice was to learn all of these verses and to learn all of the wisdom. But it basically boils down to this. The first of what are called the 8 limbs of yoga is a right relationship with the world, is learning to cultivate a sense of nonviolence and authenticity and non-taking and inner peace and non-coveting of other things, and to have a moral foundation. Second step of yoga is your relationship with yourself, learning to cultivate a sense of purity through diet and through your thoughts, not being puritanical, but focusing on pure and positive thoughts and a pure and positive diet, because you are what you eat physically and you are what you eat mentally as well. And then a great deal of discipline, because one of the crazy things that we humans tend to do is continue to do the same things over and over again and expect different outcomes. And in order to change our lives, we have to change these deeply embedded habit patterns that we have in our lives. And we have to do it in a devoted, regular way on a sustained basis. And then change happens over time. And we also live in a world where you don't want to change your habits. You don't want to change your ways. You just want to take a pill and have it ameliorate whatever you're feeling in the moment. But that's never lasting change. And as we all know, there are a lot of deep and deleterious side effects to pharmaceutical medications. And then talking about more self-awareness in a state of spiritual awareness. Those are just the first 2 limbs. The third limb is asana, the yoga postures that help us achieve balance and body awareness. When you're doing a balancing pose, again, you can't have too many flights of fancy. You have to stay focused. And they increase our circulation and the circulation and blood flow of all the systems of the body. And they tone and they open and they relax as well. And after that comes the next limb, fourth limb, pranayama, which are breath practices. The deeper we breathe, the more, again, we purify and the more we relax. When we're angry, or, it's holding the breath, or very short breaths when we breathe deep and full and slow and smooth. It's a signal to the body that you learn from caveman times. There's no bear at the cave. Everything is okay. You can relax and go to sleep. What happens when we go into that state of relaxation through yoga asana and through pranayama and through a better diet and a better agreement with the world and ourselves is that we engage the parasympathetic nervous system. Most of us are in the sympathetic, the I'm going to work longer and harder than anyone else aspect of the nervous system. And that gives us adrenaline and cortisol and the neurochemistry that we need to go get them. But when we're doing that, we're in fight or flight. All of our blood, all of our energy goes into our arms and our legs so we can fight or flight. And our immune system is put on hold. Our capacity to metabolize the nutrients and whatever our chosen diet is deeply diminished as a result of that. And we need recalibration, which we're not very good at in this modern overstimulated world. So when we come into that parasympathetic rest and digest state, everything reharmonizes. The immune system is enhanced. Our ability to metabolize is greatly enhanced. We come into a state of homeostasis. We shift from being human doings to becoming human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, the next step of yoga is called pratyahara. And it's learning to withdraw from always allowing ourselves to be affected or overstimulated from the externalized world, to come inside, come inside. And there are a whole host of practices for that, from listening to Dr. Miller's autogenic tapes to meditation, to a host of ways we can develop pratyahara. That leads to more single-pointed concentration. And that leads, which is the next step of yoga, and that leads to the seventh step, which is meditation, actually able to sit and meditate. Because most of us know what happens when we're trying to meditate. We sit there and cross our legs or sit on a chair and we close our eyes and we straighten our spine, and within 2 minutes we are off to the races. Our mind going 1,000 miles an hour. So if you've ever had that experience, anyone, it's not just you, it's most all of us, unless we were raised in some ancient Eastern environment where we were overstimulated. So we move to that slowly, and then ultimately that leads us to the final stage of yoga, which is pure presence, which is really being in the present moment, which is all there is. So you start to see that yoga is about what you're eating, what you're thinking, how you're breathing, how you're moving, what your relationship is with the world and with yourself. It's a very, very deeply complex science. And all of modern mind-body medicine is based on this. All modern mind-body medicine is absolutely based on these ancient principles that come out of this wisdom that's more than 6,000 years old, which is absolutely astonishing, but it is time-tested and proven. And in my journey of devoting myself to this Vedic wisdom and mind-body medicine ever since, I've seen so many people remarkably improve their lives, and people overcome what they felt was something that they could never overcome. Now, that doesn't mean that yoga is going to cure everyone of cancer or heart disease or diabetes, but it's got a phenomenal track record, and often a track record that is much better than modern medicine is doing in many of these areas. And it doesn't have any deleterious side effects. So that's, to answer your question, Patricia, that's giving you a little bit of the fuller picture of what yoga really is. Here in the West, we think of it as having a yoga mat, buying yoga clothes, and doing yoga postures, all of which is good. But that's just an introduction to something that can positively change a person's life on all levels.
You know, it's interesting. In going through my own cancer experience, I absolutely glommed onto what will make me healthy. What is anti-cancer health? And it parallels a lot of, I think, what you found in yoga. Maybe not as deep, but there are elements there. And part of it is certainly is that looking within, because that's where the answers are. They're not outside. And learning to meditate has been just a life-changing event. I don't know if anybody else here has experimented with much meditation. Robin?
Yes.
Say something.
Starting doesn't work. I need to say something. That's right. It's being recorded.
Well, no, I'm curious. The thing that I found, anyway, the parallels that I found interesting is it gave me something it gave me a methodology. I could change my diet. I could make smart choices. I could take control in an out of control situation. I could be disciplined. All those things were maybe surface things initially, but they propelled me down a path towards health. And I think that for many people going through cancer, they are looking for something, some methodology, some science, some wisdom to hold on to.
Absolutely. And the beauty of this is you don't have to call it yoga. You can do it if you're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, Buddhist, or Baptist. And it is about taking charge of your life. And most all of us realize that when we get a diagnosis of cancer, the first thing that happens is we just lost complete control of our life. Complete control of our life. We just lost it with the shock of this diagnosis. And so the ability to regain that control is essential on the pathway to healing. It's absolutely essential. We can't just become placing ourselves in the hands of others and hoping. We need to take charge and play a role. That empowerment alone will change our inner chemistry enough to give us a boost and to aid whatever healing potential we happen to have.
I think sadly within our system right now, we are not encouraged as individuals to step back up into that role and seek out those arenas where we can exert influence in our own best interest, be it diet, be it exercise, be it stress reduction or social connectedness. I think that the healthcare system that we consume of right now very much almost encourages us to be that passive person that this process is happening to, rather than this vibrant person who can actually impact the course of events there.
Well, you're absolutely right. And while I have real strong feelings around what you just said, I want to start by saying I know that Western medicine has a lot of good. And there are a lot of tools and techniques of Western medicine that are very powerful and very potent. But a lot of it is profit-driven and keeping the patient in a place of being a secondary actor in the transaction between doctor and patient. And that's a disempowering experience. And there are many of the techniques that are being used now that aren't that effective. Chemotherapy and radiation and surgery have track records of very little improvement over the decades, despite billions and billions of dollars being spent here. And now I think the good news is that more and more doctors are starting to understand this more holistic approach, and it's being embraced in a lot of different communities around the nation and around the world. And that's something that I feel that all of us who are devoted to helping people face cancer need to really promote as highly as we can, to let people know that if you take charge and you head the team that's seeking to heal you, that your chances are fabulously better to have the outcome that you're seeking. And you'll feel better along the way, because once again, you have a hold of this thing rather than it having a hold of you. One of the biggest healing moments in my life was when I stopped hating cancer and I stopped being in that victim mode of why me, And I would visualize myself in my little morning yoga and meditation practice. I'd have a little vision of myself putting my arms around a cancer monster and kissing it in the face and saying, I'm so glad you're here. You've taught me so much. And I think I like to say that after doing that a while and said, oh, I don't want to be around you. But it was that acceptance that was a real key for me in my own healing journey.
One of the things, getting back to the book, that I was struck by was because you had multiple health problems beyond not just cancer, but the back issues and so on, that the multiplicity of the various medical opinions you got, how varied they were, and how Dr. A would say, try this, and Dr. B would say, try that. And, it seemed that your best efforts to get help were all sort of crazed and misdirected, it seemed, especially around the back. So, and in your TED Talk, you have a picture, you have the brace, the actual brace there, which gives me as a reader a really good, so that's what it looked like. And you could see that you would have felt like you were imprisoned for most of those years. And not only physically, but by all that bad medicine. So
I'd come to feel so disempowered.
I bet.
So disempowered, Robin, that taking control of my life again for whatever time I had left was so important to find a sense of empowerment again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we all need. And we need to find it in a way that's not an angry empowerment, not a, I'm going to work longer and harder than anyone else, although that discipline, I have to say, that I learned to be successful as a journalist was helpful when all the lights finally went on after my boy said, get up, daddy, and helped me access that discipline that I used to have and apply it to going from a meat and potatoes diet to many, many years of being pure vegan, pure vegetarian, to getting up before the sunrise every morning and doing these postures that were very painful in the beginning, and to learning these breathing and meditation techniques and changing the whole, rebuilding an automobile that was no longer running at all. But I want to say to people, I've talked to people in the student body that we've had over the years, and I said, well, I just don't have discipline. That's not true. No matter who you are, no matter what your circumstance is, I invite you not to tell yourself that story, because what we tend to tell ourselves often finds a way of becoming true. You have an inner power inside of you that is your birthright. Whatever sense of higher power that you have in your life, whether it's God or some other sense, what is higher power? That higher power gave you, at the very moment of your conception, this fire inside of you, this birthright, as I said, to take charge and to form your life and to live as a vibrant human being. And it's down there deep. Sometimes it's really, really hard to find. It took me 7 years to find it again after I had broken my back and lost my career. But it was still there. And it's there for everybody. We just have to find our way to it. And usually it takes something like cancer or broken back or both in my case to let us finally find, oh, I do have some power. Oh, yes, I can. But whoever you are, yes, you can. And if you just start one day at a time, one deeper breath at a time, one commitment to better diet at a time, you'll slowly build a new habit pattern, and you'll slowly see that, yes, you do have discipline. You do have a capacity to make positive changes in your life. And if you're facing cancer, there's never been a more important time to embrace that inner power and take that tiny spark and turn it into a mighty flame of vibrancy so that you can move forward.
Were you ever tempted to slip back?
Oh, yes. There were so many times that when I'd set my alarm to get up at 3 a.m, which was when I started my practice, because the ancient Vedic texts from which yoga arises hold that the hours before dawn are the most spiritual, the most even energy. And the greatest time for healing and wholeness and self-awareness. And if you get up before dawn, don't you feel there's something a little bit special and magical, and everything else seems to be quiet, and you feel a little different energy outside or in the room before dawn? And they really understood that because they were masters in concentration. And sometimes at 3 a.m, I'd wake up and just want to pull the covers over my head and go back to sleep. But I had a tool. And that tool was my power symbol. Something that was more important to me than me. And of course, it was my boy. So every time that I wanted to pull the covers back over my head and sleep in, I'd say, "Get up, Daddy." So that's another tool everyone can use. You have someone in your family that you love. Probably many people. There may be someone, a little child, that you often is, really touches you deeply. Let that be your power symbol. You might come up with something that doesn't have to do with family relations, but find a power symbol. What motivates you to do something for something that's larger than you as an individual human being, and hold on to that and use it. It really works. It got me out of bed many, many times when I didn't want to get up.
One of the things that in sharing your book with other people, one of the responses that I've got back from people is, I just don't have the time to practice the way Bhava does. I couldn't devote that many hours a day. I can't get up at 3. I've got a day job, and or I couldn't afford to live that kind of lifestyle because I have to earn money for my family or whatever. So I've heard that from others, and I wondered what you must get that quite a lot. So I wonder what your response to that might be.
I do, and that is a great question to ask. Now, my morning practice, I sleep in, sometimes really late until 7:30 in the morning, and my morning practice is only about a half an hour, whereas in the beginning it was hours. And my life is no longer consumed by practice, because they become habits. Now I always eat good food, and even the thought of eating junk food or fast food, unhealthy food, doesn't even enter my mind. I no longer have any cravings for those sorts of things. So it's integrated into my life now. And not everyone has to be as, I think, devoted. You might call it fanatical. I was, and I prefer devoted. But I had a broken back.
Oh, no excuses.
And I was dying. On the flip side of that, though, let me flip it around for a second. If you have an advanced cancer diagnosis and you only have 6 months to a year or a year and a half to live, please don't tell yourself that you don't have time. Because going to work and not doing the things that you need to do, your time is going to be up really quickly. And imagine if you took that time and even took a tremendous economic chance and you were able to heal yourself, what would that mean for your children and your family and eventually your grandchildren, and as an example to others? We have also seen people who did have time but wouldn't make the change. They just were obstinate. I'm going to eat my hamburgers from the fast food place and drink my soda pops, and I'm not going to make a change, and I'm not going to go spend a month somewhere at an Ayurvedic center, which helps you heal your body and mind in a very concentrated way over a 28-day program, because I don't want to leave the city I'm in. I don't want to leave what I'm doing. And I've seen some of those people pass. They're no longer with us because of that, holding on to these old habit patterns. So it depends on where you are in your life. Where are you in your life? If you have a very, very serious condition, it's telling you, you have to stop. What does an animal do when it's deeply wounded? It crawls under a rock or into a cave and finds a safe place and relaxes until it heals. What do? We keep working, doing what we're doing and stressing ourselves out and diminishing our immunology. So it depends on where you are. And even if you're working a full-time job, you can just get up 45 minutes earlier than you usually do. And let 30 minutes of that be a little bit of deeper breathing, a few postures that will help blood and life energy flow through your body, and a little bit of silence and stillness and positive visualization, like I'm strong and healthy and calm and relaxed, which I got from Dr. Emmett Miller. And
Emmett Miller.
and I still do. I'm strong and healthy and calm and relaxed. So you're telling yourself a positive story that creates a positive inner chemistry inside of your body that promotes your healing. And then all you're doing after that is changing your diet. If you're eating bad food, for instance, cancer is not caused by meat and dairy, but meat and dairy tend to promote the growth of cancer cells. Vegetable protein tends to shrink cancer cells. So if you have cancer that's growing, which should you choose? Which should you choose? And how much would it hurt to try? Even if you felt, oh, vegetarians are California hippie nutcases, I don't want to have anything to do with it, like that. There in California who wrote the WarriorPose book, and I'm going to stick with the diet that I have. What's it going to hurt to give it 6 months if you're in such a serious condition? So that can just be a half an hour every morning and a change in your diet, and you're starting to tip the scales in a very positive direction.
And I think dietary change is actually much easier than people make it out to be, in that every time you eat, you have a choice. If you could just make a slightly healthier decision, just 1 out of 3 meals, and just start. You know, the old saying, a journey of 1,000 steps, 1,000 miles starts with a single step, is so true. And just making those small little incremental changes lead to other incremental changes. And all of a sudden, 6 months down the road, you're in a very different place. And I don't understand why people find change so difficult when really it doesn't have to be.
Because we're habituated, and that's been helpful in the development of humankind. So we don't have to invent how to make fire over and over and over again. It becomes a habit, and we pass the habit along and relearn it. But it's out of control in this overstimulated society in which we live. So we have a lot of bad habits, and they're very hard to stop. It's very hard to stop if you have alcoholism. It's hard if you smoke cigarettes. It's very, very difficult. You're addicted. If you like junk food, it's very, very hard to stop, because those foods are infused with salt and grease and crunchy and the things that they know from their scientific laboratories and their testing. We want salty, greasy, crunchy, gooey, sweet. And so they give you those tastes in huge amounts, which cause tremendous amount of the illness that we have here in the first world. The 3 biggest killers are cancer and heart disease and stroke. Now it's becoming diabetes and obesity. And those are all related to diet, to the consumption of the foods that we eat. So if you start to shift, suddenly you find one day, maybe it will take a few months, broccoli tastes sweet. Broccoli is sweet. Now, I didn't know that until I stopped all the overstimulating, overspiced, over chemical additive foodstuffs that I was consuming. I like to call them foodstuffs because I don't believe they're real food. Real food is what grows out in nature. It's not what comes in a box or a can or your freezer, or a package that you microwave. Real food. And when you get rid of all of those gustatory stimulants, you start to see broccoli is sweet. Rice is sweet. Carrots are ultra dessert-like sweet. This food really tastes good, but you have to change your taste buds. So what I was saying about habits are hard to overcome, the best way I feel is to create a positive habit to replace a negative habit, and just stick with it. And it takes a few months to tip the scales. Patricia, I think the biggest challenge is we don't want to take the time to tip the scales. We live in a society of instant gratification. And as I said earlier, oh, you're eating pepperoni pizza and drinking beer and eating jalapeno peppers and you have acid stomach. Do you want to change your diet and take 3 months to get over acid stomach, or do you want to take a pill? purple pill. Well, most people
Right.
take a purple pill and go on and do the various things that are still causing the problems. And ultimately, they have a perforated ulcer, but they didn't feel it. They didn't see it coming because they were taking a purple pill. So if you can find that tipping point, find that point where you've actually beaten a bad habit with a good habit, it will stick and change happens then.
I think too, we need a psychological detox, that we're just so bombarded with noise and energy that's not good energy. Whether it's on the TV or on video games or on the computer, it's endless. We don't have any silence anymore.
It is endless, and we are addicted to that.
Yes.
Addicted to that external stimulation. And little do we know that when we're watching television, do we realize we're actually surrendering our consciousness so that they can implant advertising images and slogans and thoughts and ideas into our consciousness? And the average American has had millions of those implanted into their minds by the time they become adults. And so we've lost control of our minds and our thought process, and we become very easily manipulated when that happens. So it's not just the cacophony and the noise, we're actually having our brain changed by people who are not so concerned about our health and wellness, but are concerned about our patterns of consumerism. So one of the things I did too was completely turned off all media for years and years, even though I came from television news.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
didn't watch that either. Now I do watch some things and I enjoy it, but I'm very careful, and if it does happen to be a commercial program, I'll always mute the commercials, and I'll tell myself, you can't have access to my mind. I'm going to stop that. And I won't even look at it because they know people mute it. So they've actually arranged the images that are coming to you and the words that are coming to you to still permeate your consciousness and get the message inside of you. So you're right, Patricia. We need to go find nature more. What happens now when young kids go to the beach or to the park or to the mountains or out in nature? It's boring to them.
Oh, they have their headsets on.
Like a video game.
Yeah, they have, or they go with loud music and headsets. And it's annoying.
Because that overstimulation we're addicted to. And so when we start to settle down to a real rhythm in our lives, it feels uncomfortable. Imagine, to millions of us, millions around the world, nature and her natural slower rhythms, except when a hurricane comes, nature feels uncomfortable because it's not going fast enough. And that causes a lot of stress. And you know, as a psychologist, Steffi, that there's a lot of stress out there. A lot of stress, and a lot of it's due to overstimulation of ourselves.
I have a question. I wanted to kind of get back to the book and you as a writer of a book. When I'm sure you knew as you were living your life that this was a tremendous book and it really a story that needed to be told. But I was wondering about the actual experience of writing it, that while you were writing it, you would have had to revisit a lot of those really awful times prior to your feeling healed through yoga. So what was that like? What was it like to revisit that? Because you tell the story, the reader's being brought along in real time, but I know that you as a writer wrote it. You wrote it knowing how the story would end. But we, the reader, don't know until we get there.
Yeah, you have to buy the book to see if I lived or I died.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if, having done that, I've wondered about what was it like for you to go back to the dark places and write about those?
It took years. Not to write the book, but years before I committed myself to writing it, several years. I had thought about it. I had felt inspired because I wanted to share what's possible with other people. My real motivation for the story was, hey, if someone as dark and self-pitying and depressed and addicted and broken and sick as me can make it, don't tell yourself you can't, because I crawled out of a pretty darn deep hole, and you can too. So believe in yourself. And that's why I wanted to write it. But for years I felt I can't go back and realize what a great life I had as a foreign correspondent for NBC News. It was always a point of pain for many years.
Yes.
Another reason that it was easy not to watch television is I didn't want to see the news, because that was the tribe that I had lost.
Right.
And then the second piece of it was that I had to find the courage to admit that I was addicted to prescription medications and alcohol, and that I was really angry and depressed and scared. And I was afraid to admit that for years, until I finally realized that's an important part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important part of the story, is to admit how vulnerable I was and how broken and dark I was. And once I got past that piece, everything sort of fell into place. And I realized I like my new life better. I love this field of mind-body medicine, and hopefully something that can inspire other people and can help them heal. I actually like this better. And at my age right now, I don't want to be in a war zone. Or that's a younger person's game. So when that happened, that's when I was able to do this all and write it fairly quickly, because I used that same discipline of getting up to do a yoga practice to write the book. My secret was I got up every morning at 4 or 5 in the morning, and I committed myself to writing for 2 hours before I had breakfast, before I did my...
Just plugging in my computer. It's going to fade out if I don't.
So I committed myself to writing for 2 hours every morning before I got on with the day and started to become distracted or check my email or all of the other various things. And that was a key, because if you do it every morning, you develop a positive habit and you stay in the same voice and you remember where you were the morning before in the book. Whereas if we're writing and we skip a few days, we have to go back and figure out where we were in the book again. And if we're distracted, we have to go back and find the voice, the authentic voice from which we want to write. So that's how the journey of writing a book that I had never done. Despite being a journalist, I only wrote 1.5 to 2 minute stories for the nightly news, unless it was a documentary, a longer format. But it wasn't writing chapters or long paragraphs or a book. And this was something that I had never dreamed that I would do. And I've written 2 subsequently, and it's been something that's been fulfilling for me.
You tell us about your other books.
Well, I wrote a book. I actually wrote them before I wrote this final one. One is about the 8 limbs of yoga that I talked about, of getting right with the world and right with yourself, which I still struggle with. And I'm not perfect. I have many flaws to apply mind-body science to for the rest of my life. And those 8 limbs of yoga and breath work and withdrawal of the senses, I wrote a book on that based on one of the ancient texts called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's probably the greatest scientific text that we have on yoga, written approximately 2,500 years ago by this Indian, probably lived in a region in what we now call Afghanistan. And it articulates the science of yoga. And in short, terse little aphorisms, the Sanskrit word for that is sutra, like a stitch that stitches things together, and then you expound on some of those. And I expounded on the centerpiece of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is the 8 limbs. And then I wrote another one about deep yoga, which is what my wife and I formed about yoga as a process of going deep, and just little stories and vignettes about yoga and Ayurvedic medicine, more or less a collection of essays. That was the first one. Then the 8 limbs became a little more serious and academic and hopefully illuminating piece of work. And then came the memoir, WarriorPose.
How long did it take you to write it once you actually sat down and started writing?
I think about 3 months.
Really?
Wow.
Somewhere between 2.5 and 3 months, because it was every day. And then a publisher came along, Ben Bella Books, and I went through a process with their editor, which I found really fascinating. She would read a vignette about it. It's in 3 parts: life as a journalist, life as a broken human being on drugs, and life where this mind-body medicine we call yoga helped me survive and thrive. And she would focus in on a particular vignette, like being in Afghanistan or the drug wars in Colombia or covering apartheid in Africa, and say, tell me more. What did that village look like? What was that character like? And through that process, I would flesh out some of the scenes and some of the characters. And also, I would remember new things that I would want to go back and integrate into the book. So that was probably, Patricia, another 3-month process.
The editing, the editorial
The
process.
editing, right? The collaboration.
The digging in even further. Dig deeper. Deeper. We're almost there.
I see China. We get so deep.
Well, this is a fascinating discussion that could go on for days, I suspect. But we're coming up on an hour, and I want to just say thank you so very much for your time, your wisdom, your insight, and for writing this amazing book. It is a book I recommend to so many people because I think it's just incredibly inspiring and incredibly brave. It took a lot of guts to write this book.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That means a lot to me, especially those of you who are in the Anti-Cancer Club, because I feel the same way. I'm inspired by the work that you are doing. I admire all of you so much that I can play a very small role in your organization by writing some articles and doing an interview like this means the world to me. You are changing the world one person or one family at a time, and what you're doing is absolutely amazing. And I admire you too, so thank you. It's been an honor to be with all of you today.
Robin, what do we have coming up for next month?
I will show you. I will show everybody. I'm going to turn my light on here. Our next book next month is this one called Not in the Pink. And it is a graphic novel about breast cancer. And it's done by Tina Martell, who has joined us on this forum before. And Tina is someone who has won, this book has won numerous awards. And the way Tina and I met each other is because we were constantly named as finalists in the same book awards. And we were finally connected on Facebook saying, you know, we're always a bridesmaid and we're never a bride. So that's how we started to correspond. And then we, and as she's a fellow Canadian as well, so there's lots to talk about with respect to our healthcare system and the things that she experienced. But the graphic novel format is a different medium and delivery, because Tina is an artist primarily and a writer secondarily, and so she has really got some images that are, I'm hoping we can see them and present them next time and talk about what they mean, because there's just so much in even one of the pictures. You could talk about it, and it certainly it touches a lot of nerves in cancer caregivers, cancer survivors, cancer patients, anybody even thinking about cancer. It definitely will get us all thinking and talking.
Well, Tina will be with us next month, which will be fabulous. And thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thanks, Bhava.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.